We're live on YouTube. It is the September 12, 2018 modules team meeting for the Node.js project. We're joined with myself and 11 other individuals, and we have a jam-packed agenda for today. Is there anyone on the call who is able to help with notes today? Anyone? Bueller?
I can do it. Just give me a second.
Thank you. Much appreciated. To those of you who are on the call, the doc is inside of the chat. Please sign up in the attendance of the sheet. I will attempt to capture that information, but it is very helpful for you all to do so. We'll kick off by going into our update on progress. The first thing to bring up is issue number 177, a session at the Collab Summit in Vancouver. I don't know how many of the people on the call are aware, but Node+JS Interactive is coming up. It is coming up in just a couple weeks, and there's going to be a collaborator summit that's going on 2 days. It's specifically October. The event is happening. God, my schedule's all over the place. It is October 10th to 12th, and the 12th and the 13th are the collaborator summits, and we have time on the agenda specifically to talk about Node, and so to talk about modules in Node. And so if anyone's going to be there, it will be a great time to collaborate on some of this in person. For those of you in the group who are not planning to attend, primarily for financial reasons, we do have a travel fund. So if you are interested in finding out more about the travel fund, please reach out to me and I can help you figure out how to get a sponsored trip to Vancouver to participate in the event. And we also have an ability for those in the project to get discounted tickets for $0 to the conference as well. So please, reach out to me if this is something that you're interested in. The next one that we wanted a quick little update on is creating terminology. I believe that's Salah. Can you give us a little bit of a heads up on this one?
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to get the PR so people would start contributing to it. I think, compared to most on the team, terminology is really, their area where they have terms to define. I was very, very interested to at least have a definition for a term. But at this point, I'm not sure from my part what I'm able to do to move this forward. I'm definitely open for recommendations from everyone. I've seen some people have contributed to the PR, but beyond that, I'm just wondering if anybody has a recommendation how to create a process that we all contribute to when we have a term that we would like to share with everyone, I guess.
Okay, excellent. So if people could take that, any of the concerns or thoughts that they have to the issue on that, it would be greatly appreciated. I believe, if I'm right, by looking at the list of panelists, that we have 15 people here, 13 of which are active members, which means we have quorum. So I would like to quickly get quorum on approving Ruby's request to join as an observer. Does anyone object to this? Excellent, and so it is. That is considered passed. Ruby's welcome to the team. I will take care of closing that out and updating the member list. So on to the discussion with a little bit of time left over. The first thing that we have on here is a 5-minute time box on talking about deadlines. I'm going to kick it off. Does anybody want to start the conversation on this? Any hands? Okay, well, Salah?
Yeah, I guess it's a segue to the next topic as well. We are trying to work together to get a survey that is worthy of sending out to collect developer feedback. Um, Basically, the survey would really help our efforts to actually deliver something developers want. A few people have really worked hard. And we currently have a process. We have really good, efforts and initiatives. And I guess this is one deadline that I think is important for all of us, that before moving forward with a particular idea of what the module's implementation would be in the end, that we would get some input from the community.
Thank you, Salah. I'll set the stage on this a little bit. I am, and I know I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to do it again and be explicit. I am concerned about our inability to drive consensus. And I'm hoping that by the end of this meeting, we can have consensus around a few things. But, I want to make an intention clear to the group that if by the end of this calendar year, we are still not really reaching consensus or making progress, I am most likely going to step down from participating in this group and, potentially advise spinning it down. We've been working on this for 6 months, trying to get things ready for newer versions of Node. Node 11 will be cut in October. And if we want to have any chance of actually having stuff ready for Node 12 that could end up in our next LTS that will be, pretty much being managed until 2022, we will need time to do iteration. So I want to make it really, really clear to the group about my intentions on that. And I know hard deadlines suck, but my time, I don't have time to continue investing in something that I don't feel will be successful. And I'm not saying that I've given up right now, but I am genuinely getting close. And I'm sorry to share that in a harsh way, but I don't know how else to say it at this point. Salah?
Yeah, so I think all of us share in your frustration. And I think what we should be trying to do is really finding ways, new ways, to contribute to actually build a different way to actually reach decisions. And some of us did that trying to work on the survey process. Obviously, our initial goal was the developer survey, but internal surveys is something that everyone expressed interest in last meeting. And based on that, we tried to roll out a survey today. We had a lot of people take part, which is good. Not everyone, which would have been a lot better. But obviously, because we're still doing this for the first time, we can't really expect that everyone is aware that it's going on. And we actually don't have some people's emails, so they didn't even get invited. So what I'm trying to say is that doing the old process without trying to change something is probably going to be the reason if this doesn't work out. Let's try to all come up with different ways to do things. And I think there's definitely a lot of potential with everyone involved in the group, and we all have this as a mutual goal. And definitely, we're gonna turn this around. I have very, confidence in everyone.
Okay, great. Jeremiah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just like the second Myles statement. Like, if no progress can be made towards Node 12, I think it would be probably best to spin things down and probably advise the TSC to move in some direction.
Geoffrey?
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts on this. One is that, you've seen basically my like main concern with the existing implementation has been the whole ESM and JS thing that I've opened several issues about and tried to like drive a process to reach a consensus first that we should do something about this, and second, how should we do something about this? And I feel like we made a lot of progress there, although I feel like the tools to do so are poor. Like the whole, GitHub issue or pull request tools just don't seem to fit very well into like working for many people. So if there are better ways to do that, I'd love to see them. And then it's like I got to the point of like, okay, so let's make a pull request, and that kind of coincided with, oh, let's start over and do a minimal implementation. And so then it's like all the attention is going to the minimal implementation. And so, but then I don't know kind of how we're moving forward with that too. I think like what we need is like, we need some direction in terms of like who's supposed to be doing what when, in terms of like, if we were going to be working on the minimal implementation, that's fine. But like, what are you, Myles, or anyone else expecting out of anyone in terms of how are we making decisions as to how to move forward that implementation and pull requests into it? And if you want to make a draft schedule and plan of who's doing what, I mean, that could be a way of moving it forward. But I just don't know how to move forward my concern related to the shipped implementation, or, I'd love to contribute to the minimal, but if I, knew how to make it happen.
So I think that perhaps that is a good transition point. Salah, you are next up on the agenda to discuss the survey stuff. Would you be okay with punting that until after the discussion about the minimal kernel, and I'll ensure that we have at least 15 minutes at the end to discuss it?
Yeah, but I'll just remind those who haven't taken the survey to, if they have an email, to do so now. That would be a good thing to do, and then we can pick it up afterwards.
Okay, so with that being said, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is number 166, managing a fork and agreed upon minimal kernel. So I missed last week's meeting, but I read through the notes, and it appeared like, we were having a hard time reaching consensus on what this minimal kernel should be. Myself, Brad, and Guy met this morning to try to draft, something that we could workshop around what a minimal kernel is. And so I'm just going to read that to everyone and then kind of kick off a discussion, and then we can maybe start a shared doc or put that into a comment. A minimal implementation, we believe, requires bare imports. This is something that we think is necessary for either browsers or Node or any runtime that wants to have a serious module implementation that will be used with good user experience. We believe that a minimal implementation cannot have dynamic path searching. Requiring a full path is an issue for tooling, and a long-term situation is required, and migration strategies will have to be discussed. So to be explicit, one of the stakeholders that we were talking about when discussing this was very much for the TypeScript use case, for the CoffeeScript use case, for many of the use cases where this won't work. But we do think that the minimal implementation cannot have it. And Jordan, I do see your hand. Are you okay with waiting until I finish going over
Yep.
all the stuff? Okay, great. We believe that...
not have what? Was it?
The last part was dynamic path searching. So that means explicit paths. And I'll quickly go over how this is implemented afterwards, and perhaps I should just... I'll copy paste what I'm reading into the chat, and maybe that will help people follow along better. And I'll just add context while I'm reading. And it is not letting me paste. Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second to try to figure out what's going on here. Thank you for your patience. And it's not letting me paste. Okay, I will figure that out afterwards. I'm going to just quickly blast through this. It requires CommonJS backwards compatibility. but how that's done, it should likely be through something like create require function, which does support this. Something like import meta require is something that can be discussed later on, but should not be part of the initial kernel. And we should also hold off on being able to import CommonJS, specifically until more progress is made on the dynamic module spec, which is something that Guy is working on that would allow for named exports. In the minimal implementation, .mjs should be the only way to currently import ESM. To be explicit, the intention is to move forward with format databases as a way to map extensions to support multiple use cases. So .js should be able to be used eventually to support lots of different use cases, but that we want to essentially not have a set in stone way to use it to start. And that the minimal implementation would only support importing ESM. So that would mean it would not support JSON, it would not support native modules. Create require function can be used to get these, but that all of these features would be examined later, potentially through something like a format database or other ways to bring it in. And that's kind of the idea that we have there. And one of the big parts of it is ensuring that that this thing is able to be used and able to do all possible use cases. So what I'm going to do really quickly is we have that issue on minimal issues. I'm just going to paste the copy into it, and it's issue 166 because it's not letting me paste it into the chat. I guess it's too long. The suggestions that we have to move forward would be 3 pull requests. One is one that removes importing of formats other than ESM, so no CommonJS, no JSON, no native modules. The other is removing dynamic path searching, so no extension adding, no directory resolution, no support for index.js, but we would still support the main field for packages so that they can be required as a bare import, and adding the create require function. It is the belief, and Brad signed off on this, and I was +1 on it, as was Guy, that this minimal kernel is something that allows all of the use cases that we have discussed. It is by no means something that we should be directly shipping, but I think that it is a kernel that all of our proposals could equally build on top of without giving any one proposal more advantage than any other. Jordan, you had your hand up, and I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I guess I'm conflicted here because I agree that path searching can be seen as a added feature, and therefore, even if we decide we want to ship that by default, that could be argued that path searching is something built on top of a minimal kernel. So I see that argument. However, I don't see that feature as something that can ever not be there. So I'm not sure how to resolve that to then come up with a official position for myself, but I'm not yet at the point where I want to say it must not be a minimal kernel unless it has path searching, but yeah. I feel very uncomfortable about shipping a minimal kernel without it.
And I think to speak to that really quickly is a strong part of this was to speak directly to what the minimal kernel doesn't do, what our intentions are to fill in. And because we do not have consensus on that, I don't think that it's something that we can have in a minimal kernel.
I mean, and that is, again, like it with my two minds here, like if we say that the minimal kernel is only the things that we have consensus on, then it becomes so minimal that I'm not sure it's still a kernel.
Yeah, I do think it's worth considering though that the minimal kernel that we're discussing, aside from create require function, which is something that would throw in most environments, would for the most part be compatible in other environments. Salah, you had your hand up.
I think what's missing in this list is what the minimal implementation does not close the door on. In other words, everyone on the team wants to see a lot more than what is listed here. And they are going with the assumption that it will be possible, but they are also now going with the fear that it might not. Could we add a third bullet list with this? Things that we are committed to actually reaching. I think if people know where we're going to end, they're going to be a lot more comfortable about where we're starting.
I personally don't think that we have consensus to be able to make that statement.
What we are closing the door on, maybe. What we are definitely not going to do. Can we have that list?
We can try to put it together, yes.
Like, you know, beyond minimal, like when this lands, it will not do the following.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? This way people know that they are not committing to something that goes entirely against what they hope for.
Okay. And if you have some copy you can suggest, that would help. Kevin?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of back up what Jordan said and kind of say that a minimal implementation that isn't sufficient by itself, you know, to meet anyone's standards, it kind of just begs the question of consensus to begin with. So it's perhaps it can move us towards consensus, and I hope that it can. But it may also be that it just, you know, delays the inevitable, you know, like discussion about, you know, finding consensus on things that we don't have consensus on. So I think that's where the difficulty comes in.
Thank you, Kevin. Gus?
Hi. Maybe like as a middle ground here. We have all of these things that are like, we can't even find consensus to put them in the minimal kernel. And they're like, for the things that are already in there, in the code base at this moment, what if we just put them behind flags instead of having to, you know, argue about whether to remove them or not, just like as a middle ground solution there.
Does anyone have a direct statement to that? I don't want to keep hijacking the conversation. I do, but I don't want to like take advantage of being the chair.
I support it. It's a very good suggestion. I think flags are actually very good for anything that some people disagree with.
Just so I understand, do you mean like flags for them specific, like directory searching, like more minor features of modules?
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges that we would have with that, Gus, is, at least in my mind, one of the intentions of the minimal kernel is to have a shared code base that every pull request for a set of features that make a solid proposal can be made against the same code base. And if we start having some features that are flagged and some features that are not flagged, it makes things a little messier to do that.
Do you mind if I go next? Because I have a point about that. So I feel like we're like conflating two things. It's like there's minimal in the sense of like technologically minimal, like what's the, like we could build importing ESM modules first and not have any common JS compatibility. And that's like a phase 2 of the kernel, the new kernel that we're building. And then there's like minimal in the sense of like only throw in the things we all agree on and then gradually add more to it. And this mixing of them, of the both types of minimal, is kind of, I think, adding to the confusion. My thing, we pretty much had consensus, at least in GitHub, about the ESM and JS thing, but that's pushed off as a, like, you know, this isn't part of the first pass of this because it's not really necessary, you know, in the phase 1 of the new kernel, which I agree with. But it's also like, you know, if you're going to have a list of like features we're going to ship with, I would want this to be like, all right, this is a must build this before shipping, but can be in a later phase of the new kernel construction type of thing. Maybe we can make a list that's like kind of on 2 tracks of like, this is like phase 1, 2, 3, et cetera, of the new kernel, the things we all have consensus on, but like don't necessarily have to be in phase 1, et cetera. And then a separate list of like things that we don't have consensus on, so may or may not be in any phase, et cetera.
That sounds good. One thing I would encourage against, though, Geoffrey, is assuming that because there was consensus in a GitHub issue, that we have consensus within the team. Speaking for myself, there is so much noise in the GitHub issues that I tend to disconnect from those and more engage in the meetings for what it's worth.
But we also need better tools then, because there's just not enough time in a meeting, one hour every 2 weeks, to really reach consensus, to actually talk about these topics in enough depth to discuss them, to then reach an agreement on them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the solution is there, but.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think what we tried to address with the survey, the internal survey, is actually come up with a tool that can allow us to move forward. Just imagine if this list was basically based on people responding whether or not they wanted a feature in the minimal or flagged or not at all or never. You would have everyone's results. You're not doing it based on your own perception of what you think an issue really tells us about consensus. And it's consensus because that's what a survey is, not because of a conversation or because of discussions that some people might even not be aware of. I think consensus really starts with everybody having equal opportunity to give their opinion, and then some people having the right to veto that because of some valid reason, technical or otherwise.
Thank you. Jan?
Yeah, two things. A survey can definitely give us a good or a better impression of what the wider opinions are inside of the group. The problem with treating a survey as consensus is that a survey can give us consensus on isolated questions, but those questions will have side effects on each other and they will not be actually independent. So we might get, yes, we all have consensus that we should be doing those 5 things, but never do these other 5 things. But then we figure out that 2 of those 5 things that we definitely wanted to do are at odds with each other, and we are back to not actually having a consensus. Also, what I would say is to the flag solution, just as a late PS to that one, I think we don't have a lack of alternatives and what we might do and what we might not do. And if we want to have a shot at influencing what the ecosystem is doing, if we want to have a shot of actually making decisions ourselves, we have to make choices and not create options, because the Webpack default behavior will not be, it will be one thing. It will not be a combination of 20 different options that randomly matches whatever the person uses when they use Node.
Thank you. Wes?
Are we suggesting that we can't ship a bunch of options and see which ones get used because we're sure the options that get used are ones that we don't actually want to ship? Is that what we're saying?
I don't think we were ever saying, perhaps there's a misconception here. This is about work that we're doing on the fork. This isn't about anything that we're shipping in Node Core or anything that's going out in a release. This is solely about creating a common ground, reaching consensus on something so that we can have a win and have a shared kernel that we all agree are features that need to exist and that all of what we're trying to build can be built on top of. Salah?
Yeah, to build on that, so the idea of flags, the way I saw it when Gus said it, and he might correct me, is that if we have those implementations and we are just doing this within the team, before we land anything, then we should be thinking of our implementation as something that can be flagged out. And if we cannot write code that cannot be turned off, to allow other people to try code that might be conflicting when it is turned on for that code, then I don't think features are really the problem, but I think it's more of an implementation issue. And flags obviously are the way, you you can turn on and off features. So we should be able to do that.
Without a hand up, I'll again speak to that. So I think that the challenge here, and perhaps this is something that we can attempt to reach consensus on, I don't think it's about what feature we want on and off. I think it's about what collection of features make a proposal that is a fully thought out user experience. And that's not solved by turning on one thing or turning off another thing, because they are all interconnected and there is a combinatorial complexity of how these interact with one another.
Yeah, could I just add to that? I do understand that this is ultimately the goal, but to build towards that goal, you have to start not considering every single thing, every single aspect of the user experience, because by all means, this list is obviously not that. By anyone's perspective, right? So everyone compromises a lot to say that this is a good user experience. So as a starting point, whatever features some might not be happy with should be considered as a potential feature, not a feature that is on by default. The minimal implementation in my mind is it imports ESM, and if it's doing anything that is beyond the module wrap, then it is depending on Node, and then this is a choice. So at least that's from my opinion.
Guy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to just try summarizing, as far as I was aware of it when we discussed what sort of a process this would create going forward, and then maybe just to hear thoughts about if I'm right in what I'm assuming and how things would go. So, I mean, as far as I was aware of it, the idea of the minimal kernel was to build off where we all have the intersection of our consensus, and from there to be able to then add back features through the process, building consensus slowly again. But obviously, if we start from something where we all are lacking features that we want, then the process of adding features back suddenly becomes a lot more implicit and defined. So, and the fact that the minimal kernel isn't something that we're going to ship unto itself, and correct me if I'm wrong, Myles, but the goal is to build on it, to work it towards the point at which it would form our proposal. Does that sound about right?
That sounds 100% accurate to me.
Sure.
Could we write that down? It was actually very compelling.
It can be copied from the notes.
Yeah, we'll do that. So I think we should add it to the list, you know, what the list is.
So, Geoffrey, you have your hand up?
I was just going to say, I mean, we obviously have at least a few things that are certainly we all agree on, like the minimal implementation should import ESM, et cetera. I don't know if this is already in the minimal fork that's out there, but like if we have a few tasks that are already like there and someone just needs to go and do them, you know, can we start organizing that work? Maybe not in this meeting, but like just to start getting the wheels turning and making forward progress?
For what it's worth, Jeff, as far as I am concerned, we have all of the code already written to have this minimal kernel ready to go tomorrow. It just needs to be collected. Gus, is create require function ready to go aside from not having consensus over on the main repo? But like, is the PR ready to kind of maybe be transitioned over?
It needs to be rebased, but beyond that, it's fine. And I would say one thing, it has uses outside of ESM, which is why I put it against, which is why I didn't move it over to the ECMAScript repo. Mm-hmm. But yeah, feel free to review it now. I just have to resolve a merge conflict on it.
Okay. And we can also try to like, okay, actually, maybe here's a piece of consensus that we may be able to reach today with the team in the chat. Does anybody object to the modules group giving a proposal to the Node project that we would like to see create require function land as a feature within Node?
I don't know enough about it to make a decision at this point.
Okay. Would that be a -0 then, Jeremiah, or is it an objection?
I mean, it's kind of an objection if we're recommending that the TSC land it.
Okay.
Is that what we're doing?
No, the intent of stating this was that we do have a moratorium on modules, and because this affects modules, it would, in theory, be something that we would want to have buy-in from the group on. So I was thinking, obviously it would still need to go through the Node process, and anyone from the project could object to landing it. But if we're thinking about landing it in our minimal kernel, if we have consensus of that being part of our minimal kernel, then it seems reasonable that we would make a recommendation for Node Core to consider landing it in Core. And Benjamin, to your question, implement and require can be built on top of create require function.
Why land it in Core and not just into our fork?
Because it's a generally useful function, as Wes was saying, that should likely be in Core anyways. And I think anything that we can do to not have to do extra work in our kernel would be helpful. And I think it would be a good win to have something that we can bring to the project. But we don't need to do that. We can land it in our implementation and then rebase afterwards. Salah?
Yeah, so I think on top of create require function, we should have sort of a list of this kind of contribution, something that the community needs anyways and could help us. But also to clarify whether or not this is, the only direction we're going to be taking would be important at this point. So this does not close the door on import.meta, whatever, or whatever alternatives are in discussion on some threads.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, given that context, I'm neither a plus or a -1.
Okay. So based on that, and as we have quorum in the group with no objections, I'm going to make that recommendation. And Jeremiah, if you have concerns in review as a collaborator on the project, I encourage you to, do what's necessary in that pull request based on the review. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think even it's kind of irrelevant given I didn't realize exactly what you meant when you first stated what you stated.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that we're communicating properly and you're okay with that. So we've gone through the 20 minutes and I want to make sure that Salah has time to review all of the stuff with the survey with us. I would really appreciate for those of you who have been on the call who have concerns about the minimal kernel. I know Jordan and a few of you have expressed, Kevin had to drop, but expressed issues potentially with the path searching. If you could go into the issue, what I would find personally most productive, if you could make alternative proposals or specifically talk about not just the thing that you have problems with, but explicit alternative things that we could do. I would really love to see if we could reach some sort of consensus around this. I may take an action of actually putting together a pull request to implement what is said in that minimal kernel. So if people have hard objections, if you could get those in, in the next day or so, I'd really appreciate it. Salah, I'm going to hand it off to you to lead the discussion on the survey.
Okay, so is it possible I sent you a link. Is it possible to open that, but just keep the URL because it's like the results page? I'm not sure how I can share a window from my end.
If you click on more, you should have, or no, where is it? If you look at the bottom, there's a thing that just says share. It's like a green box, and you just click on it.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so, well, the URL will be visible for like, I can't seem to hide the toolbar and the new Chrome. So just give me 1 second, trying to. Yeah, so I guess, if you can write all that long URL, that's fine. But I think the idea of an internal survey is that it really helps people who are either not able to participate in ongoing discussions for reasons that there's too much noise or otherwise, and especially those who cannot contribute to the meeting or take part in the meeting discussions. Those surveys are a really good tool. If someone wants to propose something and have everyone, give their opinion on it, we can work together to create a survey like that, put their question on it. Ultimately, this is a lot more concrete than any thread we can discuss. And consensus really is, not possible if you can't have everyone going through the same path to indicate what they really feel about something. The way questions are phrased is not going to be really the topic of this conversation because a few people took the initiative. They've done, in my opinion, amazing work. And anyone who would like to improve upon this survey or any kind of survey effort we are doing, we're a collective effort. This is our effort together. So with that said, I will have to say I didn't write those questions. No. I was actually part of the group, but other people really did a far better job than my own drafts, which you will get to see too. So it's not really a good indicator that we only have 10 responses. So these results can be any kind of results. It doesn't matter at this point. So we don't take a lot out of whether or not decisions can be made from this. But I think the most important thing we can get from this is that we need tools. This could be a tool that we can all learn how to use to reach the consensus that we all need. So based on this, we have two ongoing tracks. The B track, it's basically the internal surveys. They're intended to help us with our internal processes. The C track, which is based on what we did in the first set of private iterative reviews, is going to be this team, like in general, the work group's effort, collective effort to create a survey that will be for developers by next month, let's put it this way. How it's going to be rolled out is not yet determined, but we want to have it maybe in the collab sessions. That would be a really good starting point. I guess that's an overview. Okay, so anybody has any inputs?
Wes, you've got your hand up.
Right. So I've been looking over the questions, and like, there's the one thing that I don't understand from them. Like, yeah, they're telling me things, and they have responses, but like, do we know like what the derived action items are from these questions based on like what we see the responses are? Like, what kind of things do we want to pursue based on the responses to each of these questions? It was less obvious to me. Is that recorded somewhere or something? Because I feel like that's kind of an important part of the survey that we're intending to derive what we want to do from.
Definitely, it's what we will get from the survey that we deploy, the developer survey. It's the direction that surveys should take generally. We are getting there. It's just there was no process to create a survey. We did what we felt was important to actually get into the process, begin the process. And everyone who has a concern should work with other people who can eventually get a good question onto a survey that goes public. Everyone that has a concern within the group should work with others to try to come up with a good question to have their concern addressed within the group. It doesn't work that, 2-3 people sit and do this for the group. The group has to do that collectively. It has to be driven by your incentive to get an answer. People can be good at working with you to do that. So we have people who, did that for the past couple of weeks. But obviously, people who have good questions didn't like the questions that they saw. And I guess that can apply to everyone. So yeah, I hope that kind of addressed what you were going for.
Wes has his hand up again. Wes?
Not quite. It was more technical, like based on the feedback for like the first question, or for the question you have on screen right now, or how will Node.js users find import.meta useful? Like, what is the planned response based on how that question is responded to? Like, if everyone responds, they won't use it at all for Node.js programs, what's our expected response? If everyone responds, yes, they'll use it as frequently as their name or file name, what's our response? And if there's no response based on any of the responses, then what's the question for? That's pretty much like what I'm wondering.
So again, let's revise the draft together, and you can work with us to actually try to come up with a good way to hash out what really the question is trying to get. It's individual efforts at this point. It's not structured, group-oriented goals. It's a good question from my perspective. What it really delivers to us and what it tells us to do is really something that this group should figure out what questions they need to ask developers at large. And to do that, a starting point is someone puts a question that they think is doing that. And then you come in and suggest, okay, so we need to figure out exactly what we're trying to ask. That's a really good second step. So, okay, now we have an idea of if we want to write a good question, we have to write out what the question will really be answering. So everyone has to, refine the process as we move forward. So I guess my answer is that it's too early to try to answer the concern that you have, but let's make draft 2 of this question together, and you can help us with your, help us, follow a process that addresses your technical aspirations or ambitions for how the questions are formed. Again, this is like a draft. This is the first attempt. None of us are doing this full time. But I think I can speak for all of us. We're good developers, and we need input from developers.
Salah, if I could add a couple thoughts to this. One of the things that when I went through this particular survey, and I'd like to see the other survey, but I would like to advise less of a focus on specific features in piecemeal and more on general thoughts regarding architecture and capabilities. The difference is subtle, but I think, and this is a problem that we have within the group as we're trying to reach consensus on this, if we talk about every single feature independently, they may be good or bad, but it is kind of the higher level architecture decision when all of these different features come together that start to become problematic. And especially if we're doing a survey of external people, and I'm looking forward to seeing the questions that you have on that one, it's not really helpful to ask someone if they know about a particular feature if they don't have all of the context. What's way more useful is to try to figure out what kind of things do people prioritize and what kind of things do they want us to prioritize. And I think to Wes's point, it's going to be extremely important that we're intentional about what are we trying to ask, what are the answers that we're trying to get, and what are we planning to do with those answers once we have them. And I would like to advise you to not consider the survey a form of consensus. It's not. The survey will be a lens that we can use to help make decision making, but the consensus process is something that we have to do as a group. The survey is a tool, it is not a panacea.
Yeah, so definitely, I guess, so for the last statement, yes, it's understood. A bad survey does not reflect consensus. It's one of the tools that, if used right, can actually reflect consensus to a certain degree. But using it right is something that we all have to, build a process to guarantee. You can't have a survey and then also at the same time be talking about the survey where other people still didn't have it, for instance. So we're all going to learn from this, and we're all going to refine our expectations from it. But it definitely is a tool that we can figure out how to use internally, separate from the developer survey. And I think it's a missing tool in my opinion.
So Salah, in the sake of time, and Guy, if you don't mind holding your question for a second, we have 3 minutes left, and we haven't looked at the other survey yet.
So an ongoing draft, it's not ready yet to be shared. We're still revising the ongoing draft for C1. But it's a completely separate survey at this point. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing the same window. Yeah. So for that survey, we start off by trying to understand who's taking the survey. Again, please contribute to the process to improve it. At this point, comments are good, but involvement is a lot more encouraging and a lot more needed at this point. So we're trying to actually get your input after every question or at the end of every section. Then we try to talk about what you use Node for a developer who uses Node. They can be using it for a lot of different things. We try to get a good snapshot of what they use it for to try to understand what modules really mean to them. Again, there are other drafts. This is not the one draft. So here we try to understand their code base. We try to understand a bit about their tooling, their compilation paths, a bit about the diversity of their production code. And then, you move from there to trying to get their expectations about features. And here features are, obviously the wording is not the point, but features here are more of what do you expect ES modules to be like when you use them, when they land, not particular building blocks from the internal context. Things about customization. At one point, there was no loader flag, now in experimental, and then it was there. So these are this part is, I think, where if we understand who's filling out this part, we can make a lot more sense out of what they would expect out of ESM. There's also a part that could get feedback on experimental modules because, hey, if it's out there and we don't know what it did, then it's not very helpful, or at least it could be a lot more helpful if we can close that loop. Then we could actually get into, give your opinions about how modules should be in the browser. Like, they are in the browser, but should they be different? Again, the actual questions, don't forget, this is like draft 0 for the team, although it's been through multiple iterations within a few of us who have been working on this. And then there's a part, because a lot of people are not necessarily good at Node, but are front-end developers who are very good in JavaScript or consider JavaScript as one of 3 things they know how to do in life. Front-end, an optional section that is only given to those who indicate that they really are front-end developers, allows them to give us a similar profile as the one they give us about their Node usage, with regards to their usage of JavaScript, especially comparing modules versus scripts in the browser, and obviously where JavaScript tooling is involved. So this is like one potential roadmap of how a survey can be laid out. It did involve at least 3 drafts taken by at least 1 or 2 participants in every draft.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are over time.
Okay.
So if you could wrap up quickly, please.
So yeah, I guess it's the end of the survey, anyways. And in the end, we try to get some feedback as the internal one about what you want to be involved in. How do you want to help us move forward?
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And what are next steps that people can do to participate and help you with this?
So I was hoping after B1, we would know which areas of the survey each one of us is willing to take part in helping with. And then people with matching interest will, get together some way. They'll figure it out. And we can begin a process where, we have a checklist for all the different areas that need to be worked on, and those people updating everyone.
Okay. One thing that I do want to encourage you on is that we have a month until interactive, and I want to discourage creating too much process because it will likely not result in being able to complete in time.
There will be a point person.
There
will be a point person. So
deadlines.
Yeah. Okay, great. Everyone, thank you for joining today. I'm going to stop